The summer of 1888 was the kind that came in without apology and stayed too long. Out on the Kansas prairie, where the grass ran gold from horizon to horizon and the wind never quite stopped moving, there was a ranch called Harlan's Crossing that sat 3 miles east of the town of Delfield, far enough from neighbors to keep its secrets and close enough to the road that strangers occasionally found it by accident. That ranch had belonged to a man named Cole Harlan for 11 years. He had built it with his brother, then buried his brother, then kept building anyway. That was the kind of man Cole was, not the kind who explained himself, not the kind who asked for company, just the kind who got up before sunrise and didn't stop until the work was done or the light ran out, whichever came second. He was mending fence along the south pasture on a late July afternoon when he saw her coming down the road. She was on foot. That was the first thing that struck him as wrong. Nobody walked out to Harlan's Crossing unless a horse had thrown them or a wagon had broken down. He scanned the road behind her. No horse, no wagon. Just a young woman in a faded, dusty blue dress with her hair pinned back and a leather valise gripped in one hand, walking like she had come a long way and intended to go a little farther. Cole watched her until she turned through the gate. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her business. But something in the set of her jaw told him this was not a woman who had gotten lost. This is their story. A tale of a woman who arrived with nothing but a name and a piece of paper, and the man who would have to choose between the home he had built and the truth she carried inside that old leather bag. Now, Eleanor Voss was 26 years old, and she had been traveling for 8 days. She had come from Cincinnati, where she had worked for 3 years as a bookkeeper in a probate law office, the kind of office that handled wills, property transfers, deed disputes, and the quiet financial ruin of people who hadn't known to protect themselves while they were still alive. She had learned to read a land record the way a preacher reads scripture. She knew the difference between a witnessed signature and a forged one. She knew what a fraudulent notary seal looked like when you held it up to light. She also knew what it looked like when a piece of land had been taken from someone who couldn't fight back. Her mother, Clara Voss, had died the previous winter in Cincinnati, in a rented room with one window and a view of a brick wall. She had lived in that rented room for 19 years. Before that, she had lived in Kansas. Before that, she had owned land. Eleanor had found the deed folded inside the lining of her mother's old travel trunk, tucked beneath a false bottom of thin cedar that only came loose when the hinges finally rusted through. The deed was yellowed and soft at the folds, but the signatures were clear, and the property description matched a parcel on the Delfield County records. Harlan's Crossing, 160 acres. Her mother had never spoken of it, not once. Eleanor had spent the weeks after the funeral pulling what threads she could find. A transfer record at the county courthouse. A notary whose name appeared on the deed of sale. The deed that had supposedly conveyed the property from Clara Voss to a man named Douglas Yates, who had sold it 6 months later to the Harlan brothers. A sale price that was less than the cost of the seed to plant 1 season's worth of wheat. The notary was dead. Douglas Yates had moved to Colorado and could not be located. But the deed was real, and the original signature, the one that said Clara Voss had agreed to sell, was not her mother's hand. Eleanor had spent enough years reading documents to know she had not come to Kansas to reclaim the land. She had come to understand what had happened to her mother, and if the truth pointed somewhere, she intended to follow it until she found what was buried at the end. What she had not counted on was the man waiting at the gate. Cole Harlan was 33 years old, and he had the look of a man who had learned patience the hard way. Not the soft kind of patience that comes from having plenty of time and nothing pressing. The other kind. The kind that comes from holding on to something through years of drought and debt and loss, and deciding, season after season, that you weren't finished yet. He set down his post driver when she reached him and waited. "I'm looking for the owner of this property," Eleanor said. She didn't ask. Just stated it like a fact she expected to be confirmed. "You found him." She looked at him steadily. "My name is Eleanor Voss. My mother's name was Clara Voss. She owned this land before you did." Cole didn't flinch, but something shifted behind his eyes. "My brother and I bought this place legal, from Douglas Yates, 1877. "I know," Eleanor said. "I've seen the Yates deed. What I'd like to know is where the deed before that came from." A long quiet settled between them. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere in the south pasture a horse stamped and blew. Cole looked at her valise, then at her face, then back at the road, which was empty in both directions. "There's a well around back," he said at last. "Water's cold." He didn't invite her in exactly, but he didn't send her away. That, Eleanor had learned, was as much of a beginning as most things got. The next morning broke with a sky the color of pale bone, and Cole was already at the fence line before the sun cleared the ridge. He worked in the early morning quiet the way he always did, with the particular focus of a man who needed his hands busy so his mind could stay still. But his mind was not staying still. He thought about what she had said on the porch the evening before. Not just the words. He'd heard claim talk before, people who thought they deserved something because of a name or a distant relation, but the way she had said it, without heat, without accusation aimed at him specifically. Just a woman who had found something in a trunk and followed it to the only address it pointed to. The boy, Thomas, had taken to her immediately. That alone was worth noting. Thomas was 12 years old, had been at the ranch for 2 years after his parents died of fever on the trail west, and he had the particular wariness that orphan children develop, the kind that reads people faster than adults do because adults can afford to be wrong. Thomas had watched Eleanor eat supper on the porch the night before with the unblinking attention of a boy making a decision, and by the time she finished her beans, he had told her about the fox that kept getting into the chicken house. Cole knew what that meant. He didn't know yet what it meant for him. He rode into Delfield mid-morning, ostensibly for feed and wire, mostly to think. He hitched his horses outside the general store and stood for a moment in the street, looking at the facade of the county offices down the block, where the land records were kept. The town had been his anchor since the early days. He knew most faces, traded at Mercer's store, attended services when the weather allowed, nodded to Judge Aldous Crew at civic gatherings without warmth but without friction either. Crew had been the county recorder for as long as Cole had been in Kansas. A polished man, silver watch chain, dark suit, the kind of careful smile that told you exactly nothing about what he was thinking. Cole bought his wire and his feed. He did not go to the county offices. He rode home in the afternoon with the thing sitting in his chest like a stone that hadn't decided where to settle yet. Eleanor was in the kitchen when he returned. She had the valise on the table and papers spread around it, and she was writing something in a small notebook in a hand so precise it looked like print. Thomas sat across from her watching the pen move with the expression of someone watching a magic trick. Cole stood in the doorway and looked at the deed she had set out on the table. Yellowed paper. Clara Voss, written at the bottom in handwriting that looked nothing like the signature on the deed of sale he had in his own strongbox. He had always assumed those signatures belonged to the same person. He had never thought to compare them because no one had given him reason to. He crossed the kitchen and picked up the deed. "Read it slowly. Set it down." "The signature on my deed from Yates," he said. Eleanor looked up. "Doesn't match." "No," he said, "it doesn't." She waited. "I didn't know," he said. It wasn't a defense, just a fact he needed to say. She looked at him for a moment with those careful, tired eyes. "I know," she said. "That's not why I'm here." Cole pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Outside, Thomas was whistling at the chickens. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window and fell across the deed and the notebook and the woman who had walked 8 days to find them. "Then why?" Cole said. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She set down her pen. "My mother never talked about Kansas," she said. "Never once. When I was small, I thought she didn't have a past. Later, I thought she was ashamed of something. When I found the deed, I thought I understood. Someone had taken something from her, and she had decided to just—" She stopped, folded her hands. "I want to understand what happened to her. Not to punish anyone who doesn't deserve it. Just to understand." Cole looked at the deed. "The notary on the original sale document," he said. "Aldous Crew." Eleanor's hands went still. "He's the county recorder. Has been for 20 years. The kitchen was quiet. The afternoon light moved, slow and certain, across the table between them. The town found out within 2 days. That was how small towns worked, not through malice always, but through proximity. People noticed the young woman walking the county records office with Cole Harlan, noticed the careful way she read each page before turning it, noticed the way Aldous Crew smiled at her from across the room with his careful, telling-nothing smile. They built their stories from what they could see, which was a woman with a claim and a man who might be about to lose something. Mabel Hargreave, who ran the dry goods with her husband and considered herself the town's unofficial moral register, stopped Eleanor on the main street on Thursday morning. She did it pleasantly, with a tipped head and a worried expression. "I hope you understand, Miss Voss, that Mr. Harlan is a respected man in this community, whatever your business may be." She paused. "It might be better conducted through proper channels." Eleanor looked at her with the same attention she gave to a record page she wasn't sure was accurate. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Hargreave," she said. "The county archives are proper channels." She walked on. Cole, half a step behind her, said nothing. But his jaw had set in the way it set when he was holding something in rather than letting it out. That afternoon, Eleanor sat in Mercer's store and spoke quietly with Dorothea Mercer, who had run the store's books for 30 years and remembered everything. Dorothea was the kind of woman who watched and held and said nothing until someone asked directly. Eleanor asked directly. "Clara Voss," Dorothea said, turning the name over. "I remember her, young woman. Quiet. Came in here, must have been 69, maybe 70. Had a little parcel east of town." She paused. "Didn't stay long. I always thought that was strange. The land was good." "Do you remember a man named Douglas Yates?" Dorothea's mouth pressed thin. "I do." "Was he a friend of Judge Crew's?" Dorothea looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and set a worn purchase ledger on the surface. "I keep records," she said. "Always have." It was late that evening when Eleanor found Cole in the barn, where he went when he needed to think, without walls around him. He was sitting on a hay bale with his hat in his hands, and he didn't look up when she came in. "There's a room above the harness storage," he said. "My brother used it. I never changed it. You're welcome to use it proper, instead of the storage room off the kitchen." He paused. "I know that's not the offer, it sounds like. I just mean this is going to take a while." Eleanor stood in the barn door with the lamplight at her back. "Cole," she said, "not Mr. Harlan, Cole." He looked up. "She was 19 years old," Eleanor said, "my mother, when it happened. She was 19, and she was alone, and she had a piece of land and no one to stand beside her when someone wanted to take it." He held her gaze for a moment. "I'll stand beside you," he said. "Whatever this turns into." He didn't say it the way a man says something he means to be remembered for. He said it the way he said everything, like a fact he expected to be confirmed in time by what he actually did. Eleanor nodded once. "All right," she said. "Then let's start early." What followed was not dramatic. It was the slow, careful work of people who know that truth requires evidence before it becomes truth. Eleanor spent 4 days in the county archive, reading every record she could access. She found 3 other property transfers from the 1869 to 1872 period that bore the same notary seal as her mother's fraudulent sale, Aldous Crew's seal, and in each case the original deed showed a female name, and the transfer showed a sale price that would not have covered a winter's worth of provisions. In 2 of the cases, she could find no record of the original owner receiving anything at all. She brought Dorothea Mercer's ledger to Cole in the evenings. They sat at the kitchen table, Thomas sometimes between them with his chin in his hands, and she walked Cole through what she was finding, line by line, with the patient precision of someone who had learned that explaining clearly was the only way to be believed. He had the seal, Cole said on the third evening, as county recorder. He could notarize anything. Yes, and with Yates doing the actual sale, his name wouldn't have appeared on the transfer deed, just on the original. He was quiet. Just on the document most people would never think to check. Just on that, Eleanor said. Cole set his hand flat on the table. He left it there for a moment. "My brother," he said, and stopped. He looked at the wall. "My brother paid for part of this land. Before he died, he was proud of it. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that cost something. If I'd known, Eleanor didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She didn't fill the silence with comfort. She just stayed in it with him, in the lamplight, while the Kansas night pressed against the windows. After a moment, he picked up the ledger again. They kept working. The thing that changed the shape of the case was Thomas. He came to Eleanor one morning in early September with something held carefully in his closed fist. He had found it the previous spring, he said, when he was digging near the posts of the old storage shed for a reason he could no longer remember. He had kept it because it seemed important, though he couldn't say why. He opened his hand. A woman's ring, plain gold, thin, with a small engraved initial inside the band. Eleanor held it in her palm. She recognized the engraving. She had seen it in her mother's handwriting on the bottom of letters, a small stylized V that Clara Voss used the way other people use a signature flourish. Her mother had been here, had lived here, had left something behind when she was pushed out. Eleanor sat down on the porch step and held the ring in both hands and did not speak for a long time. Thomas sat beside her, close but not quite touching, in the way that children sometimes know to do. Cole came out from the barn, saw them, and stopped. He left them there. He went back inside and put the kettle on. When Eleanor came in later, her face was composed, but her eyes told a different story. Cole set a cup of tea on the table without saying anything. She picked it up. They didn't need words for it. Some things don't need explaining. 2 days later, Cole found the tin box. He had been replacing the boards beneath the old storage porch, the same area Thomas had been digging near, and one post had rotted enough that he needed to pull it and reset it entirely. When he levered up the base plate, he found the box beneath it rusted shut, with initials scratched on the lid. CV, he brought it inside and set it on the table without touching the lid. Eleanor opened it with a kitchen knife in steady hands. Inside was a photograph, a letter, and a fragment of burned paper. The photograph was of a young woman Eleanor did not recognize, but who had her mother's eyes. The letter was from the woman in the photograph to Clara Voss, postmarked 1869, warning her that a man named Yates had been making inquiries about her land and that she should not sign anything without a lawyer present. Her mother had not signed anything, but someone had signed for her. The fragment of burned paper, when Eleanor spread it carefully on the table, showed 3 lines of a legal document. Just enough to see the format. Just enough to see a partial seal, a notary seal, in the corner. Not the seal of the legitimate transaction, the seal from the fraudulent one. Someone had tried to destroy this, had not entirely succeeded. Eleanor looked up from the table. Cole was watching her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something unguarded, something that had nothing to do with the land or the deed or the legal question. She looked back at the evidence on the table. "I need to speak to Reverend Aldridge," she said, "before we go to the town meeting." Cole nodded. "I'll ride with you." He did not ask if she wanted company. He had stopped asking that 3 weeks ago, somewhere in the middle of the archive work, when it had stopped being a question. The town meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the community hall, which served on alternating weeks as a meeting space, a school overflow room, and the informal courthouse for matters that required a large audience. It was full. Word had traveled, as word did in Delfield, with the efficiency of a dry grass fire. Eleanor stood at the center table with her valise open in front of her. Cole stood to her left, his hat in his hand, his face still. Thomas stood near the door, too young to vote and too stubborn to go home. She spread the documents in order, the original deed in her mother's name, the fraudulent transfer document with the forged signature, Dorothea Mercer's ledger, open to the entries showing 3 similar transfers in the same period, all passing through the same notary, the burned fragment, the ring. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse with heat. She simply explained what each document showed and what it meant in the same tone she would have used to present a probate accounting to a law office. Precise, clear, complete. Dorothea Mercer sat in the second row and confirmed the ledger entries when asked. Reverend Aldridge, who had been Delfield's minister for 23 years, stood and confirmed that he had found, in the church burial record, an entry for a woman named Clara Voss, dated March 1870, a woman recorded as having left the county the previous autumn without collecting her personal effects from the church lost property box. He had that box still. It contained a handkerchief and a small Bible with Clara Voss's name written inside. Aldous Crewe sat across the card-room. He had come expecting to watch a young woman embarrass herself. His polished smile had lasted through the deed comparison. It had faded during Dorothea's testimony. By the time Reverend Aldridge sat down, it was gone entirely. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say that would have helped him. The county sheriff, a quiet man named Del Ferris, who had been in his position for 6 years and was trusted precisely because he never looked for reasons to use it, rose from his chair near the wall. "Judge Crewe," he said, "I'd like to speak with you at my office tonight." Crewe looked around the room, saw no opening. He stood and walked to the door without a word. The room was silent until his footsteps crossed the threshold. Then it was not silent at all. The weeks that followed were not simple. They rarely are when a wrong is old enough to have settled into the ground and put down roots. There were legal proceedings. There were depositions. There were other families who came forward quietly, one at a time, with their own documents and their own questions. Eleanor stayed. She had not planned to. She had planned to learn what she could and go back to Cincinnati and file the proper paperwork and let the law do what the law did. But the legal proceedings required her presence, and her presence had become, somewhere along the way, something other than temporary. She noticed the change in herself the morning she found she had unpacked her valise without thinking about it. The shoes were on the floor by the bed. The notebook was on the window ledge. The dress she traveled in was hanging on the hook by the door, and she was wearing the borrowed work dress that Cole had found in a trunk and set outside her room without comment. Thomas had started saving her the best cup at breakfast. Cole had stopped sleeping in the barn. On a quiet evening in mid-October, when the prairie had gone from gold to rust and the air had begun to carry the first true edge of autumn, Eleanor sat on the porch with her mother's ring in her palm. She had been thinking about what to do with it. It was her mother's. It had come from this land. She was not sure whether it belonged in Cincinnati or here. Cole came out and sat on the step below her, not beside her, just nearby. They sat without talking for a while. The sky went orange, then pink, then gray. "There's going to be a formal ruling," Eleanor said, "from the state court. Probably March." "I know. The land will be held in question until then. You'll still be running it, but there'll be a lien." "I know that, too." She looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the way his hands rested loose on his knees. "I didn't come here to take your ranch," she said. "I know," he said. "You came here for your mother." She looked at the ring. "I found her," she said quietly, "or found what happened to her. That's not the same thing. But it's something." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and held out a folded piece of paper. His handwriting on the outside, careful and uneven, the way a man writes who learned his letters late and has never quite made peace with a pen. She took it, unfolded it. Inside he had written, "Whatever the court decides in March, this ranch has been tended by a woman's work once before and stands to be tended by one again if she's willing. I'm not asking for anything that isn't freely given, but I'd be glad of the company for as long as it's offered." Eleanor held the paper in both hands for a long time. The wind came off the prairie and moved through the grass, the way it always had, the way it always would. She looked at the house, the porch boards Cole had repaired, the fence line running out toward the road, the window where Thomas had left a lamp burning. She folded the paper, tucked it into her pocket beside her mother's ring. "I'll stay through March," she said, "and then we'll see." Cole nodded. He looked at the horizon. That was enough, for now. It was more than enough. They were married the following spring, 2 weeks after the state court ruled, and the matter was set to rest. Reverend Aldridge spoke the words beneath the cottonwood at the edge of the south pasture, the one Cole had planted the year his brother died, and which had grown, over 11 years, into the kind of tree that looked permanent. Thomas stood at Cole's side, straight-backed and solemn, as if the occasion required his best posture. Eleanor wore her blue dress, mended now, clean. She had left the valise in the house. She didn't need to carry it any more. Cole took her hand when the Reverend said the word and held it the way a man holds something he has decided to protect. Not tightly, not possessively, just steadily, like a fact he expected would stand. After, they stood together at the fence and looked out over the land. Thomas hung a new wooden sign at the gate. Eleanor had painted it herself in the careful hand she used for documents that mattered. Inside the house, on the kitchen windowsill, she had placed her mother's ring beside a small glass jar filled with prairie grass. Just there, just visible. A woman who had once stood on this land and been pushed off it, remembered now in the house that had once been hers, by the daughter who had come back to say her name out loud. A house keeps the stories of everyone who ever lived in it, even the ones who were forced to leave without a proper goodbye. The walls remember, the ground remembers, and sometimes, when the right person comes through the door and knows how to listen, the truth finds its way back to the light where it always belonged. Thank you for watching. This channel is no longer supported by ads, and these stories continue because people believe they matter. Patreon is a quiet way to support the work with early access, story previews, and small moments of input before each tale is fully told. On screen now is a preview of the Patreon page. If you'd like to support the channel, the invitation is in the first pinned comment down below. I'll see you in the next story.